Nearly every film produced is categorized under at least one film genre, with a distinctive set of traits that allow each genre to be distinguished from one another. Film critic Tom Ryall describes a film genre as something that follows convention, with recurrent patterns and audience expectations. Nevertheless, there are films that break away from tradition, relying on individualistic style of the director to tell a story. This is where the concept of genre and style break apart, as the former is more of an umbrella term that describes a film's category as a whole. This is the case with the 2008 British film The Boy in the Striped Pyjamas and the 2009 Chinese movie City of Life and Death, both motion pictures that arguably fall under the war film genre, but use different techniques to achieve common themes. While they cover similar concepts, their styles vary, largely due to the narrative paths that each film embarks on. According to film theorist Andrew Tudor, this separation allows the concept of an auteur to permeate the seemingly rigid standard traditions of a genre-specific film, giving the director more creative freedom to highlight certain elements on screen for the viewer. The two films are not only geographically different from one another, but they portray different cultures and time periods that are foreign. Since there has been a considerable amount of time since the events in the two films, observing the pictures now provides a holistic understanding of their impact that would be otherwise unobtainable when viewing films within the war genre that portray more recent events. A common trait of war film cinematography is shaky handheld style camera movement, which parallels the chaos on the battlefield. Still, the choice of how a narrative is portrayed through the lens rests with the director and his or her desired interpretation, as it did with directors Liu Chuan and Mark Herman, though the harrowing, painful experiences that underline the genre are still present in both movies. City of Life and Death does not stick with a singular style of camera movement, but rather fuses the shakiness and brevity of camera shots that is associated with contemporary war films with more structured, extended ones. It's worth noting that the scenes of combat are the ones that are shot rather chaotically and unsteady, while the scenes that propel the plot forward are the opposite, with the camera lingering on what appears to be carefully planned out cinematography. This is one of the first of many scenes of violence in the film, which is hectic and visually hard to follow, though the scene directly after it continues the plot, as the Japanese take the Chinese as war criminals, with this alternating camera style repeating throughout the duration of the film. The shots are very intimate and are perhaps meant to convey a sense of realism, putting the audience face first in the action and drawing no attention to the fact that the film is artificial. The film allows dirt, debris, and dust to cloud the lens during the battle, giving the audience the same feeling as the soldiers that fought at the time. However, The Boy in the Striped Pyjamas takes a different approach, with the camera work being less frantic and more meticulously planned. The resulting camera shots are grand and generous, aware of the audience viewing, with smooth tracking and panning throughout. While this may seem uncommon compared to the other movie, it should be noted that the film is a clear breakaway from the traditional sense of the genre. There is no explicit warfare scene within the scope of the movie, but rather the side effects and much of what happens behind the curtain.
Come on!
This narrative approach, while sticking to the same grief and loss that is abundant in the genre, allows the film's cinematography style to be atypical. The camera explores the beauty of the setting, which isn't reduced to ruin and rubble as it was in City of Life and Death. Instead, it is, for the most part, beautiful and scenic, and the camera definitely employs varying camera shots to showcase that. It is this visual beauty in The Boy in the Striped Pyjamas that creates a sharp contrast from both the concept of war and the Chinese film's portrayal of it. The only exception to the beauty is the final scene where Bruno and Schmoll are forced into the gas chamber. He uses wide shots, though this time it's to indicate the large amount of people that are affected by the war and the amount of lives it has taken. While the director did not show any violence explicitly in the movie, he did mention in an interview with the Oklahoman paper that he wished to save the reveal of the monster of the film for last, perhaps to pique the viewer's expectations. He compares it to a really good horror film, which indeed the two films do convey a sense of horror, though that horror is found in humanity's own actions.
Bruno!
The films are united, however, in their use of close-ups, in which they both convey fear, terror, and sorrow, emotions that are undoubtedly a product of war. While it is expected for these close-ups to be of those involved in combat, both films do an excellent job of portraying how wide-reaching these oppositions are, showing that there is more damage than just what is to be done on the battlefield. They show families being torn apart and killed thanks to the war, though these instances were not expected by the families. Still, despite the differences that both movies have in terms of cinematography, the stylistic elements explore moral choices and the repercussions of atrocious actions, which are important to any war film. Perhaps one of the most important identifiers of any genre is one's iconography, and both movies incorporate war icons in the mise-en-scene of the film, though one relies more heavily on it than the other. Combat is a typical icon of these films, as is the respective weapons and uniforms used, though death, brutality, and inhumanity are common too. Either way, the movies are able to display even the intangible icons through the lens of the camera, creating varying levels of effectiveness. City of Life and Death opens with letters and postcards that indicate that war is going on, before delving into the action on screen. There are plenty of guns, tanks, planes, and other weapons of violence, making it easy for the audience to understand that the characters are in the middle of combat in what can be assumed to be a war film. The costumes are also indicative of the narrative, as is the setting, which are largely broken down and ruined buildings. The importance of these icons isn't necessarily large, as the narrative itself requires the presence of battle and warfare. This is different in The Boy in the Striped Pyjamas, which too opens with subtle icons, though it remains this way for the rest of the film. The film doesn't specifically show scenes of violence and combat, but the theme is still present overall. Therefore, icons of war must be prominent in the movie, and it is clear through Bruno's father's uniform, the Nazi insignia, and Gretel's propaganda. The film builds on the viewer's pre-existing knowledge of the time period and war, allowing the icons to be subtle so they can make their own inferences about the movie. The result is a more interactive film and relies more on euphemisms and implications, as is the case in this scene, where Bruno and his friends play as if they are fighting on the war. Or in this scene, where Bruno copies the movement of airplanes with his rackets. While the planes and guns are two icons of war, they are not explicitly shown as they are in City of Life and Death, but rather shown through the eyes of Bruno's simple mind and innocence. Even the idea of death is represented through implicit meanings via Gretel's dolls in the basement. A similar shot is shown in the Chinese film, though there is no holding back on the brutal imagery. Although it is less explicit, the themes of power and freedom versus restrainment remain relevant to both movies too. Both of them rely on the characters to depict this, as City of Life and Death shows the Chinese as prisoners and captives, while the Japanese are partaking in a victory dance, showing their upper hand over the weak and restrained Chinese. Likewise, in The Boy in the Striped Pyjamas, Bruno clearly has the upper hand as a German, standing straight with a branch, while Shmuel cowers over the fence as he is sitting down. While they are just youth, their respective roles are embedded in their characters' actions. The imbalance of power implies conflict, which film cites as a major component of any war picture, and both movies make use of the mise-en-scene to capture that. Overall, the two films divulge into their own narratives, but are linked by suffering and pain, either physical or emotional, which, judging from the movies, seem to be at the crux of any war film. The variety in styles of both films shows us two things. One, that warfare does not only affect those in battles and in combat, but those on the outskirts at home, reiterating that war is a widespread and far-reaching dilemma. But two, it becomes clear that a film genre and style are two separate entities, despite any overlap that may occur. The choice of stylistic techniques allows the progression and evolution of a genre, and in the long run, allows the category to transform into something that is fluid and permeable to change.